Yeah, thank you. I actually do have slides. This isn't just an excuse like the projector ate my homework. So I'm going to follow along with my slides while they try to... Do you think you can get it sorted out? I'll just put in my... yeah. All right, so I have a huge advantage because I can see my slides, and hopefully soon you can see them too. So I'm Edith Harbaugh. I'm co-founder and CEO of LaunchDarkly. We are based down in Oakland, California. So I came up for this conference, which was great because prior to this, I was a product person at Concur, which some of you might know is it's about 4 blocks from here. But I actually started off as an engineer. So I started off as an engineer doing big software releases at Epicentric and Vignette. The way releases were built back then was pretty archaic when we look back at it. So back then, if you did a release, you would do a year release. You would hope somebody would install it, and you get feedback about a year later that whatever you wanted to build was not what people actually wanted. What happened since the 90s is the acceleration of business, and people started doing faster and faster releases. I think Salesforce was the first person who really said, okay, let's do quarterly releases. And now when I tell people that we used to have a party when we had a release, people are like, wait, what? You know, a good software org is releasing multiple times a day. There are a lot of reasons why DevOps happened. I'm assuming that you're all in the DevOps track because you're in some way interested in DevOps. This will be really exciting if this works. So DevOps happened because just basically people needed to get stuff to the market a lot faster. There was a lot of issues with marketing if you only release once a year. Whatever you think you're going to build, it's usually too late to the market. Product people had a lot of issues with these year releases where you think you're going to get it right, you put out a feature that you like, and then it doesn't actually meet the market needs at all. The other issue with the long-lived releases, and I saw this really firsthand when I was an engineer, was that long-lived branches were really painful. How many people have had a branch that's lasted more than 6 months? How much fun was that when you had to merge it back in? Yeah. So long-lived release branches are really painful. Something that's really dear to my heart is the other issue that I saw with these long-lived releases was that you would do all these testing before it got out to the field. You would have a tested platform matrix. You would try to get a lot of user feedback. And then once you got it out to the field, whatever you had tested was instantly obsolete. We saw this over and over at TripIt. We were a mobile app. We would try to test it in our labs. And then all of a sudden, it would be out in the field with somebody on a version of Android running through an airport with a really low signal and a low battery. And just the functionality that we thought worked very well when you're sitting in front of your Wi-Fi with a strong connection suddenly failed. So the other reason for these shorter and shorter releases is so that you can get more efficiency and quickly recover from bugs. Ops usually almost always gets the shortest end of the stick. So when I was a younger engineer, we called the worst releases ones that didn't break, but that destroyed data. So this was like a Sev 0, because when you started using one of our releases, it went in and deleted all your data, which might sound minor, except for we were selling to big newspapers. So when you started using this certain release, it went in and started deleting all their archives, which is literally their bread and butter. This was a really bad release. And what happened was, I was a young engineer right then, so I was the one that was kind of cowering in the corner. Our engineering director turned to our ops director and started screaming at him that it was taking so long to get a new release out. And I thought the engineering director was, to be honest, being kind of a bully and a jerk. He'd shipped this bad release, and he was trying to push the blame to the ops people. In hindsight, yes, our dev director was kind of a bully and a jerk, but he was right. If it takes 2 days to turn around a release and get it out to the field, and you have a critical error, that's just way too long. The other thing I learned from this, and you've probably seen it all in your own life, is when you're stressed out, when you have a bad release out in the field, that's when you usually make the worst mistakes. It's just a physical reaction that when you're under stress, I'll say I'm a little stressed right now because I don't have my slides, but your mind starts to churn and you say, fix it, fix it, fix it now. And that is literally when we have made the worst mistakes in engineering. So this release I was talking about where we had this critical error that was deleting people's data, we hurriedly did a fix pack A, and then B, C, and went all the way up to J. Like within about a day and a half before we had some level of stability, because it was just basically like this rampage of fix, 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 fix. And when you're in that hurried fix stage, you're actually breaking a lot of other stuff. So from all of this stuff, a best practice arose. And my company, LaunchDarkly, did not invent it. People like Netflix and Etsy have had this secret weapon, which they call feature flagging. So how many people already are familiar with feature flagging or use it? Great, about half. So I'll give an overview about what feature flagging is. So feature flagging is this idea that you can basically wrap features and then release them and then selectively turn them on. The old way of releasing code used to be that whatever you shipped was just on for everybody. A feature flag gives you this really nice ability that you could basically dark launch it, i.e. launch with it off, and then turn it on for whoever you want. This gives a ton of flexibility. A really good way that we've seen people use this is that you can ship something and then maybe turn it on for a beta user or a friendly customer. The really nice thing about this is that if you haven't quite nailed it, you can just turn it off. And you can iterate very quickly instead of this, everybody gets it, and if it's broken, it's very bad. You could just say, okay, let's do these progressive delivery and start rolling it out to different people. This has a ton of benefits for different people within the org. So I'm kind of going to walk through who benefits from this. The biggest benefit first is for developers. If you can release separate from a deployment, what you first allow yourself to do is get rid of really long-lived branches. A reason you have a long-lived branch is usually because you have some functionality that you don't think is ready for everybody, and you're trying to protect it. The downside of this is that you have this branch that's deviating from your main, and it's getting more and more and more fraught with peril, that the second you check in, and it's going to break everything else. So if you can have these new features right in mainline, but turned off for everybody, that actually gives you a ton of flexibility in making sure that everything is up to speed, that if you have a dependency that's changing, it's baked into your code. So the first thing feature flags really give you is they unlock the ability to do trunk-based development. The second real benefit for dev is this also then unlocks in that some of the biggest fights I saw within product and engineering were usually about when is something ready. Because ready is a really loose concept. Is it ready if I've tested it on every phone in the universe? Is it ready if it builds on my own machine? Is it ready? And then you get the fights you start to have that I've seen are QA gets very overprotective because they've gotten yelled at for bugs. And so stuff sits longer and longer and longer because to be ready is to be perfect. With feature flags, what you could do is you could start to decompose what does ready really mean. Is it ready if it's good enough for 2 users who've asked for it to look at it? So like something we did internally at my own company, LaunchDarkly, was we were building SSO, and we had a couple customers who were really eager for it. And wow. But that's not my computer, though. But there's progress. And the slides are great, and you'll see them soon. So feature flags are really, really, really powerful for developers to unleash themselves from this idea that everything has to be perfect the first time you release it. The second thing it really does then is for QA. Oh, wow. This is really exciting. Whew. All right. I'm going to go back 2 slides. No, I'm just going to roll with this. All right. So Feature flagging really gives everybody within an org a lot of flexibility in terms of who gets what when, and I'm going to walk through how it works within a dev cycle, which is where I was. Dev gets access to the features they need to build when they want to build. You don't have to wait for everything to be ready, particularly if you have dependencies on another team. You used to have to do these lockstep releases, where you would have to line up every feature and make sure that they work together and then do a big release. If you wrap stuff with feature flags, it gives you a lot of decoupling in terms of you can iterate one thing and make sure that it's working with another. In addition, if you're using a lot of microservices, it allows you to make sure that stuff is working between the different microservices at the same time. Tonight we test in production. The joke is that everybody tests in production. Sometimes you actually have a separate server that's not production. I wrote an article a couple years ago called Kill Your Staging Server. And the article was basically about my frustration around how many times I'd gotten everything just right on staging. And then the instant you ship it, it's different. Like your production server always is going to win. Like it's not like you can point to your customers and say, hey, but it worked in staging, just settle down. Production always has different data. Production always has a different load. Production always has use cases that you haven't thought of. With feature flags, what you could do is you could say, okay, I know that it's going to be different in production. Let me give myself this ability to ship something and then turn it off if it's not working well, or to turn it on for more people. We've seen this with our customers help them so much because they can shorten their cycles in terms of if instead of spending 3 weeks chasing down something and staging, they can move stuff much more quickly to production. That allows them to get stuff to market a lot quicker. This isn't to say that with feature flags you should ship crappy software. I think that's why people sometimes get scared by the phrase test in production. This is just saying that if you're a good engineer, you realize that stuff is going to break in production. Why not give yourself an easy escape valve like a feature flag? Which leads me to the next one. Ops controls access to features. I told a story at the beginning of the talk about the ops person getting screamed at that they couldn't run a build quickly. Even if you have a really sophisticated build system, it usually takes about half an hour to push a new build. I've heard horror stories of people having like 4 hours to get a build together. That's an eternity if you have a thing broken out in the field. If you have a feature flag, what you could do is you could say, ops, it's 3 a.m., turn it off. Let's reconvene and do a stand-up Monday at 8 a.m. and figure out how we're going to fix it in a sane manner, instead of having to scramble with ops running a release that'll probably have a bug that you didn't think about because it's 3 a.m. The final thing I'm going to talk about is that this also has a lot of really good benefits to not just the cycle of devs, ops, QA, but the bigger org. Product, as I said before, can push features out to who they want, when they want, independent of the engineering org. So for example, if there's a risky new feature, you could push it out just to your early adopters and get the reaction. Something we've seen is that the most expensive features are the features you've built that nobody wants. This has happened to me many times. Like there's always these good assumptions of, oh, everybody wants this. You push it out. You ask your analyst for the stats. And it's like, well, nobody even looked at that page. If you could figure out pretty quickly that your pet feature is actually not loved, you could kill it early, which is kind of a mercy of, let's not waste any more time chasing this feature that actually isn't the right thing for us to be building. Marketing. Marketing launches without feature flags are really painful. You have this big 9 a.m. launch, East Coast time, which means 6 a.m. Seattle time, which means that people are up at 5:50 a.m., like all huddled around a box, like waiting for the moment to push play. With feature flags, what you could do is you could actually push everything live the day before, and then when it's time for the big launch, just turn it on, because you've separated out release and deployment. This alone saves a ton of heartache. It's really painful to be there at 5:50 a.m. and have the build not work. That's not the time you want to figure that out. A really cool other use case is sales can control access to features. A case we saw a lot of concur was that we would have a one-off feature that we built for one customer. We were selling to enterprise customers, and they would demand this one thing. And though as engineers we hated this, sometimes there's enough money on the line that we started doing these one-off features. You don't want to have that deep in your code. That's when you start to run into trouble. So with feature flags, what you could do is you could say, hey, this feature is for Morgan Stanley, this feature is for Goldman Sachs, and then have sales control it. So the takeaway I hope you have is, one, feature flags are really powerful. They can save you a lot of heartache, and they have a lot of power not just within the development org, and which is where they originate, but also for the rest of the company. I have all the slides online, and they're beautiful. So if you wanted to see the first 10 of these, you could go and get them there. I left about 3 minutes for questions, and I thank you so much for being patient with the technical difficulties at the beginning. Unfortunately, you cannot feature flag life, but, but I'm happy to answer some questions now. Yeah, so the great question was, how do you achieve feature flags? And I apologize because I had some slides showing it. A feature flag is basically an if statement. So you have an if statement in your code of if this and then this. What you can then do is for different users, they get different paths of the code. When you get more sophisticated, so what you're doing, basically doing is separating out, pushing the code from who can see it. And you could get really granular about personalization. For example, you could say, I want to block everybody from this IP from seeing a new feature because they're a competitor. You could say, I want to block anybody who has a GeekWire email address because they don't want to scoop our code. You could say, I want to enable people from this country because they're getting early access. This is something that something near and dear to my heart is Pokemon Go does this a lot. Like they'll block people who aren't a certain level from seeing some features just because the load on their system must be immense. You know, they have millions of people worldwide using their game. But happy to answer in more detail. Other questions?
How do you turn on feature flags in a controlled way?
How do you turn on feature flags in a controlled way?
Yeah, and like do you push it to all the 100% of the code, or do you go like 1%, 5%? Do you have any strategy around that?
Yeah, the question is, well, how do you use this? So LaunchDarkly is a platform for controlling feature flags. You do not need to use us to use feature flags. We think we help. I've seen customers do a lot of different strategies. If it's something where they're concerned about load, they'll start at 2%, 5%, 10%. One of the cleverest customers I saw actually would get up to about 50%, and then at noon they would go back down to 0. And I asked why they were doing that, and they said, well, they wanted to go to lunch. And if something was going to break, they didn't want to have it happen over lunch. So they would get to 50% in the morning, and then in the afternoon they would ramp it up to 100. This is a really good strategy if you have something that, so Envision just talked about it in one of our case studies. They had a SQL query that was malformed that worked fine in the local box, and then when it went to production, just starting to bring down their sites, they just feature flagged it. Because it was feature flagged, they could just turn it back down to 0. It really depends on your specific scenario, but that's a usual good strategy.
How do you right size feature flags so that make sure that they're not too much effort to maintain?
So the question is, how do you right size feature flags? I think so. We've seen our customers do every different flavor. We've seen some customers who do it for every basically pull request. So they'll say every Jira ticket gets a feature flag associated with it. I've seen other customers just do it more at a migration level. Like if they're migrating from 2 systems, they use it as an overall switch. My answer is roughly to Nathan's question about culture. What works for your culture? You don't want to have excessive feature flags, but you don't want to have too many. I've heard from some of our customers that in a postmortem they'll say, "Why didn't we feature flag that?" And then they'll start doing it more and more and more and more because it's just an easy way to save hassle.
It's nothing like a good outage to help you measure right sizing.
Well, I am out of time. I'm sorry about the difficulties at the beginning. All my slides are online. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Edith.